Andrei Chikatilo was born in October 1936 in the village of Yablocnoye, Sumy region, then occupied Soviet Ukraine during one of the darkest periods of Soviet history. First, in World War II, Roman Chikatilo, Andrei's father, went to the front. The boy survived the horrors of the Nazi occupation in Ukraine, witnessing bombings, fires, and executions that forced him and his mother to hide in basements and ditches. Once their home burned down and they had to share a bed. Chikatilo was a chronic bedwetter. His mother scolded and beat him every time he wet the bed. In 1943, Chikatilo's mother gave birth to a girl, Tatiana. Since his father had been mobilized in 1941, he could not be her father. It is quite possible that Tatiana was conceived as a result of rape by a German soldier during the war. Given that Chikatilo and his mother lived in a small one-room cottage, it is not excluded that the rape took place in his presence. In 1944, Andrei started first grade. At school, he was often teased and bullied by his peers. He was known for his extreme shyness and had difficulty forming friendships. In 1946, the Soviet government engineered a third famine in Ukraine. This traumatic event had a profound impact on Chikatilo and possibly contributed to his later deviant behavior. Rumor had it that Andrei had an older brother, Stepan, who was allegedly eaten during a previous famine, the one that lasted from 1932 to 1933. And Andrei feared the same fate awaited him. In 1933, my older brother Stepan was grabbed during a famine. Hungry, desperate people. I was warned not to go outside twice. Stepan was gone. They sat at home. The hungry were looking out the window. There are no documents to confirm the birth or death of Stepan, so most likely this was simply a story his mother used to scare the children into staying inside. Who knows? In the Ukraine of those years, corpses were literally everywhere, Wydell, right in the middle of the streets. And little Andrei had seen plenty of them. So even without that tale, the boy had accumulated plenty of traumatic experience. Despite these hardships, Chikatilo managed to finish school in 1954. His teenage years were characterized by social awkwardness and difficulty finding friends. In early adolescence, Chikatilo discovered he had chronic impotence, which intensified his social discomfort and self-loathing. He was shy around women. At 18, he fell in love for the first time with a girl named Lialia Beresheva, whom he had met through a school newspaper. But he chronically got nervous in her company and never asked her on a date. That same year, Chikatilo attacked an 11-year-old friend of his younger sister who had come to visit. Tatiana was not home at the time, so Andrei knocked the girl down, and while she struggled in his embrace, after finishing school, Chikatilo tried to enter the law faculty of Moscow State University, but failed the entrance exams. Instead of enrolling at another university, he traveled to Kursk, where he worked as a general laborer for 3 months, and then enrolled at the Okhtyrka Vocational Technical School as a communications technician. In 1955, he also began his first serious relationship with a girl 2 years younger than him. 3 times the couple attempted intercourse, but each time Chikatilo could not perform, so the girl ended the relationship. After completing his vocational education, Chikatilo arrived in Nizhny Tagil to work on a long-term construction project and also studied part-time at the engineering faculty of the Moscow Electrotechnical Institute of Communications. He spent 2 years at the plant before being drafted into the Soviet Army in 1957. During his service, which lasted until 1960, he served in the border troops in Central Asia and then in a KGB communications unit in East Berlin. His performance was excellent, and he even joined the Communist Party before finishing his military service. After his service, Chikatilo returned to his hometown. He began dating a girl, but their relationship lasted only 3 months. Again, due to his chronic impotence, the woman sought advice from friends about her partner's sexual dysfunction, as a result of which his peers learned of his problem. He felt deep shame and attempted to hang himself. He was saved by his mother and a neighbor. He felt unwanted. The disgraced man then left his hometown. Chikatilo moved to Russia, to the village of Rodyanovo-Nesvetayevskaya, where he got a job as a telephone exchange engineer. In 1964, he married Fina. The couple had met in 1963 through Chikatilo's sister, Tatiana, who was her friend, and essentially set them up. It is known that the couple had problems with sex. It happened very rarely. Despite this, Fina considered herself married to a good man, since Chikatilo didn't drink, didn't smoke, and didn't cause scenes. An exemplary family man. Chikatilo himself described the marriage as arranged. He claimed their conjugal sex life was minimal, and that after his wife understood he could not perform, they agreed she would look the other way regarding his behavior outside. In 1965, Fina gave birth to his daughter Lyudmila. 4 years later, in 1969, his son Yuri was born. Despite the fact that Chikatilo would later become a serial killer, Fina remained devoted to him until his death. Right. Let's go back a bit. In 1964, Chikatilo decided to continue his education by enrolling in a correspondence program at Rostov University, studying Russian literature and philology. He successfully completed these subjects in 1970. Shortly before receiving his diploma, Chikatilo got a job as director of regional sports events and worked in that position for a year. After that, he began his teaching career in Russian language and literature in Novoshaktinsk. As a teacher, Chikatilo was ineffective. Although he was well-versed in the subjects he taught, he had difficulty maintaining discipline in class and was often the object of ridicule from his students. In May 1973, Chikatilo committed his first known case of sexual assault against one of his students. He began groping a 15-year-old girl, touching her chest and genitals. Again, when the girl, a few months later, Chikatilo locked another teenage girl in the classroom and did the same thing. He was not punished for either of these incidents, not even for the occasions when fellow teachers saw Chikatilo fondling himself in front of his students. The Soviet educational system. One of Chikatilo's duties at this school was ensuring students were present in dormitories in the evenings. It is known that several times he went into the girls' dormitory, hoping to see girls undressed. By his own admission, Chikatilo, from the mid-1970s, the desire to see naked children compelled him to loiter near public toilets where he frequently spied on young girls. He also bought chewing gum, which he offered to teenagers trying to make contact. Due to a growing number of complaints from students, the school principal called him in and told him he should voluntarily resign. Chikatilo quietly left the job and found another teaching position at another school in Novoshaktinsk in January 1974. Just imagine. It was known the guy had inclinations toward ephebophilia or even pedophilia, and he simply switched one school for another. However, he lost that job in September 1978 due to staff cuts. Before he obtained another position, can you guess what kind of position? You got it right. A teaching position at Vocational Technical School, number 33 in Shakhty. In September 1978, in the city of Shakhty, Andrei Chikatilo committed his first documented murder. On the evening of December 22nd, he lured 9-year-old Lena Zakotnova into an old, dilapidated house. He tried to rape her, but couldn't. The girl began to struggle, so he strangled her and inflicted 3 knife wounds. Afterwards, he threw the body into the Grushevka River. Her body was found under a nearby bridge 2 days later. A significant amount of evidence linked Chikatilo to the murder. Bloodstains were found on snow near Chikatilo's house, and neighbors had seen him present at the house on the evening of the murder. The victim's school backpack was found on the other bank of the river at the end of the street. A witness also provided police with a description of a man resembling Chikatilo who had been seen talking to Lena at a bus stop before her disappearance. Despite all this evidence, Alexander Kravchenko was arrested, a man who had previously been convicted for the rape and murder of a teenage girl. On the sweater of his wife were found apparent bloodstains. The blood group of the girl and Kravchenko's wife's group matched. Alexander Kravchenko was placed in a cell where a drug addict was put next to him who physically abused him and forced him to confess to murdering Lena. Kravchenko's wife was told that her husband was involved in the murder of the girl. The frightened woman, under pressure, signed everything demanded of her. On February 16, 1979, Kravchenko confessed to the murder. The relatives of the deceased pushed for a retrial and the death penalty, which led to the case being reopened and reinvestigated 3 times. Ultimately, Kravchenko was sentenced to death. In 1990, Kravchenko's death sentence was carried out for the first murder that had terrified Chikatilo greatly, so the next 3 years he killed no one. Chikatilo's teaching career ended in March 1981 after numerous charges of indecency with children. That same month, he began working as a supply clerk at a building materials factory in Rostov. This job required Chikatilo to travel extensively throughout the Soviet Union. On September 3, 1981, Chikatilo met a 17-year-old student from a boarding school, Larisa Tkachenko, at a bus stop while leaving the public library in the center of Rostov. According to his later confession, he lured the girl into the forest near the Don River under the pretense of having a drink of vodka and relaxing. When they reached an isolated spot, he knocked the girl down, then tore off her clothing and tried to rape her. When Chikatilo couldn't achieve penetration, he stuffed her mouth with dirt to muffle her screams and then beat and strangled her. The body was found the next day. I cannot describe the details of this and subsequent murders because it is prohibited by YouTube's rules, so I'll leave all sources in the description under this video. For context, the murders were not limited to just stabbings or stranglings. Let's say that in most victims, body parts were absent, in some cases internal organs. What was this about? Andrei Chikatilo came back. 9 months after Larisa Tkachenko's murder on June 12, 1982, Chikatilo rode a bus to the Bagayevsky district of Rostov, transferring at Donskaya station. He decided to continue on foot. Leaving the bus station, he met a 13-year-old girl, Lyubov Biryuk, who was returning home from the store. They walked together until their path was concealed from potential witnesses by bushes, after which the Red Ripper attacked her, dragged her into the nearest grove, tore off her dress, and killed her, inflicting knife wounds while simulating sexual intercourse. When her body was found on June 27th, the medical examiner found traces of 22 stab wounds inflicted to the head, eyes, neck, chest, and pelvic area. After the Biryuk episode, Chikatilo could not control his urge to kill, and in the period from July to September 1982, went on a rampage, claiming the lives of 5 more victims aged 9 to 18. Chikatilo's murders increased in frequency, and he chose both men and women as targets, both children and adults. Usually he would approach his victims at bus or train stations, offering them help, money, or alcohol, then lead them to isolated spots where he attacked and killed them. Many bodies were found with mutilations around the eyes, indicating the killer gouged out his victims' eyes with a knife. With children and teenagers, he used various tactics to lure them to isolated spots. He often tied their hands behind their backs and stuffed dirt into their mouths to muffle screaming. After the murder, Chikatilo made minimal efforts to hide the body before leaving the crime scene. On December 11, 1982, Chikatilo met a 10-year-old girl, Olga Stelmakenko, who was riding a bus to her parents in Novoshakhtinsk, and convinced the child to get off the bus with him. She was last seen by another passenger who reported that a middle-aged man was firmly leading the girl by the hand. Chikatilo lured the girl to a cornfield on the outskirts of the city, where he killed her. Despite an extensive search for the missing girl, Olga's body was found only 2 days later. By 1983, 4 murders had been preliminarily linked to the same killer. In response, a Moscow police team led by Major Mikhail Fedosov was sent to Rostov to conduct an investigation that became known as Operation Forest Path. Fedosov formed a group of 10 investigators in Rostov to investigate these 4 cases. In March, Fedosov appointed medical examiner Viktor Burakov as head of the investigation. After studying Chikatilo's knife wounds on Olga's body, as well as the streaks on her eye sockets, Burakov stated he was convinced this was the work of a serial killer. After a short break, Chikatilo resumed his murder series in June 1983, killing 15-year-old Larisa Sarkisyan. By September, he had killed 5 more victims. The growing number of bodies and the similarity in the nature of the wounds finally forced the Soviet authorities to admit that a serial killer was at large. Police focused much of their efforts on the theory that the killer must be a mentally ill gay man or pedophile. Alibis were checked for all persons who had been in psychiatric treatment or convicted of homosexuality or pedophilia. Yes, in the Soviet Union, you could actually be imprisoned for being gay. From January to February 1984, Chikatilo killed 2 women in the Aviators Park in Rostov. On March 24th, he lured 10-year-old Dmitry Patashnikov from a stamp shop in Novoshakhtinsk. Several witnesses saw Chikatilo with the boy and provided investigators with a detailed description. When 3 days later, Tashnikov's body was found, police discovered the killer's footprints and also samples of sperm and saliva on the victim's clothing. On May 25th, Chikatilo killed a young woman, Tatiana Petrosyan, and her 10-year-old daughter, Svetlana, in a forest belt near Shakhty. Petrosyan was acquainted with Chikatilo from several years before her death. By the end of July, he had killed 3 more young women aged 19 to 21, as well as a 13-year-old boy. In summer 1984, Chikatilo lost his warehouse job due to accusations of stealing 2 rolls of linoleum. The accusations had been filed against him in February of that year, and he had been asked to resign voluntarily, but he refused, claiming his innocence. Nevertheless, he was able to get another warehouse position in Rostov beginning August 1st. The very next day, August the 6th, Chikatilo killed 16-year-old Natalia Golosovskaya. 5 days later, he lured 17-year-old Lyudmila Alexeyeva to the bank of the Don River under the pretext of showing her a shortcut to the bus station. Alexeyeva received 39 slash wounds. Her body was found the next morning. He didn't stop. On August 15th, Chikatilo killed an unknown young woman and a 10-year-old girl named Akmaral Seydelieva. 2 weeks later, the body of an 11-year-old boy named Alexander Chapel was found on the Don River bank. The boy was missing some body parts. On September 13th, 1984, Chikatilo was spotted by 2 undercover investigators who were tailing him as he wandered through the city, attempting to make contact with women and committing public indecent acts. He was arrested, and during a search of his belongings, a knife, a large coil of rope, and a jar of Vaseline were found. During the investigation, Chikatilo's suspicious past was discovered, and his appearance matched the description of the man seen with Dmitry Patashnikov. A blood sample was taken from Chikatilo. It showed he had blood type B, whereas the semen samples found on 6 victims had been classified by medical experts as blood type AB. The name Andrei Chikatilo was entered into the police database, but the blood analysis results largely excluded him as a suspect. Chikatilo was sentenced to 1 year imprisonment for theft of property from his former employer, but was released after 3 months. In December 1984, he got a job at the supply department of the Novocherkassk locomotive plant and kept a low profile. Chikatilo didn't kill until August 1st, 1985, when, while on a business trip to Moscow, he met 18-year-old Natalia Poklistova at a railway platform near Domodedovo Airport. Chikatilo lured her off the train into a grove near the village of Vostryakovo, where he tied her up, stabbed her, and strangled her. The following month, the police resumed patrols of railway stations around Rostov and sent female officers in plain clothes to cover bus and rail stations. At the request of Chief Investigator Burakov, the police turned to psychiatrist Dr. Alexander Bukanovsky to compile a psychological profile of the killer. This was the first time in Soviet history that a psychiatrist had been involved in a serial murder investigation. Bukanovsky's psychological profile described the killer as a reclusive man between 45 and 50 years old who had had a very difficult, lonely childhood. He was incapable of romantic relationships with women, was highly educated, probably married with children, but was also a sadist and impotent, capable of experiencing sexual gratification only through observing the suffering of his victims. The murders were a symbolic representation of the sexual act he could not perform, and his knife became a substitute for non-functioning genitals. Because many of the murders took place during the working week near transport hubs throughout Rostov Oblast, Bukhanovsky proposed that the killer's job required frequent travel, and that the days on which murders occurred suggested the killer was tied to a work schedule. Chikatilo carefully monitored the manhunt, tracking media reports and suppressing his urge to kill. For about a year, no body was found that could be linked to the series. On August 20th, 1986, a victim was found in Bataisk, buried in a depression on collective farmland. The victim was 18-year-old court secretary Irina Pogorilova, who was also missing some body parts. Since the killer had made serious efforts to bury the body, some investigators proposed that this explained the sudden decrease in the number of bodies found. From 1987 to 1988, 6 more murders occurred while he was on business trips far outside Rostov Oblast. On February 28, 1989, Chikatilo killed 16-year-old Tatiana Rizhova. He hid her remains in a sewer collector. Between May and August, Chikatilo killed 4 more victims. In connection with the recent discovery of victims linked to train travel and the fact that most bodies were found near railways, the investigation deployed numerous plainclothes officers to quietly register passengers on trains throughout Rostov Oblast. Trains were also equipped with hidden cameras in the hope of capturing a victim in the company of her killer. Burakov proposed a plan to increase police presence at major stations and place undercover agents at small ones. The idea was to detect the killer at the smaller stations. The plan was approved, and 360 officers were deployed at all stations of Rostov Oblast. At the 3 smallest stations where the killer had struck, most often only undercover officers were placed. The operation began on October 27, 1990. The murders continued. On November 6, 1990, Andrei Chikatilo committed the brutal murder of 22-year-old Svetlana Korostik in a forest belt near Donlesko's station. When he was returning to the railway platform, he was observed by a police officer named Igor Rybakov, who noticed that Chikatilo was washing his hands and face near a well. Rybakov also noticed that on Chikatilo's coat, there were grass and dirt stains, and on his cheek there was a small red spot. One of his fingers was injured. Although Rybakov stopped Chikatilo and checked his documents, he had no sufficient grounds to detain him. He later filed a report about his encounter with Chikatilo, noting his name and the possible presence of a bloodstain on his cheek. On November 13th, the body of Svetlana Korostik was found. She became the 38th victim. Police summoned the officer responsible for surveillance at Donlesko station and analyzed all reports from the previous week. The name Andrei Chikatilo was among these reports, and now law enforcement noticed that he had already been questioned in 1984 and was included in the list of suspects in 1987. Investigators established that he had been in various cities at the times when several victims linked to the case had been killed. An investigation of Chikatilo's past teaching activities showed he had been forced to resign from 2 positions due to repeated charges of indecent behavior and sexual assault. On November 14th, police established surveillance on Chikatilo. Law enforcement watched as he approached solitary young women or children and tried to engage them in conversation on trains or buses. On November 20th, after 6 days of surveillance, Chikatilo was finally arrested by 4 police officers. At first, the killer denied everything, but ultimately Chikatilo provided a comprehensive and accurate account of every murder with which he was charged. "I don't know what to repent for. A few, they got me. I don't know how many. I don't know anymore. I'm already on the other side. I've already been killed many times." On request, he could sketch the crime scenes, including the location of victims' bodies and nearby landmarks. On November 30th, Chikatilo was officially charged with 36 murders to which he had confessed and which had occurred between June 1982 and November 1990. Moreover, in the following days, he confessed to 20 more murders that had not previously been linked to the case. In December 1990, Chikatilo showed police where he had buried the body of Alexei Kobatov, a boy whose murder he had confessed to. This helped confirm his guilt beyond any doubt. He also led investigators to the bodies of 2 other victims. Of the 56 murders he confessed to, 3 could not be found or identified. Nevertheless, he was charged with 53 murders of women and children between 1978 and 1990. On August 15, 1992, Andrei Chikatilo was sentenced to death. Chikatilo was brought from the courtroom to a cell at Novocherkassk prison to await execution. He filed an appeal against his sentence to the Supreme Court of Russia, but this appeal was rejected in the summer of 1993. On February 14, 1994, Chikatilo was taken from death row to a soundproofed room at Novocherkassk prison and executed with a single shot behind the ear. He was buried in an unmarked grave in the prison cemetery. In summary, Andrei Chikatilo was one of the most notorious serial killers in modern history. His brutal and senseless acts of violence took the lives of at least 52 innocent victims, leaving their families and loved ones to grieve and cope with the aftermath of his crimes. Despite the fact that Chikatilo was ultimately caught and held accountable, his legacy remains a dark stain on the history of humanity. As we reflect on the life and crimes of Andrei Chikatilo, it is important to remember the victims and their families and to continue fighting for a safer and more just society. And those who've watched all the way to this moment, by tradition, write in the comments the phrase, "What do socks have to do with it?" Thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves.